Let's please give her a warm round of applause.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. Thanks to Skylight for having us. I'm just going to read a really short section of the title story. I have a really short attention span, so I'm just assuming that everyone else does. This is the last story that I finished, and the one that took me the longest. And it takes place in an anatomy workshop, and they're dissecting bodies. Dead girls. Her name is Gracie. It was Frank's idea to name her. Frank, your dissection partner, a ponytailed Ralpher with a limp. She looks like a Gracie, he pronounced, pulling back the white sheet. 2 hours later, he asks, "You ever seen somebody like Gracie up close before?" He means somebody dead. No, you tell him, never, and then you're flooded with a rolling, queasy sensation, the one that feels like lying even when every word is true. Or maybe it's just the reek of formaldehyde, a sick-sweet roiling in your skull. You hear the instructor as though from far away. Skin is an organ, he keeps saying, how it pulls and breathes, but all you see is the stunned yellow of Gracie's back, the blunt dead heap of her. Tiny webbed capillaries warm up from the deep. 4 tables, 4 corpses in the room. Formaldehyde pumped and wobbly, bald as aliens. They're naked, obviously, but still it shocks you, this nakedness, cold and raw and face down too. You tell yourself the dead can't be wounded, they're already dead. You make it a joke. 4 corpses walk into a bar. You and Frank spent the first half hour stalling, cleaning and re-cleaning utensils. The first instruction seemed easy enough. Place the cadaver prone. But then you mulled over the word prone. Was it just a matter of lying down, or were there in fact degrees of proneness? Frank said it had to do with the legs, opened or closed, and you kept thinking of the thing monks do, or nuns before the cross. Minutes later, you realized that was prostrate. Finally, you typed the word into your phone and read out the definition. 1, likely or liable to suffer something, typically something regrettable or unwelcome. 2, lying flat, especially face downward. You and Frank stared at the body and then looked up, as though seeing each other for the first time. You who were suddenly supple with life. You who were about to commit regrettable and perhaps unwelcome deeds. You've enrolled in a 4-day anatomy workshop, shelled out a deposit you couldn't afford, because you've been having panic attacks late into the night, because you're terrorized by the beating of your own heart, by the blood going in and out of your chest, and what would happen if it suddenly stopped, because yoga made you laugh, and acupuncture made you weep, and because you were beginning to think there was something wrong with you. But the joke's on you, because now you're standing in a room full of yogis and massage therapists, Rolfers like Frank, the sort of people who have long and earnest discussions about deep tissue and somatic memory, hidden geographies beneath the skin, exactly the people you'd hope to avoid. The instructor is a tall, loose-limbed man named Jeremiah who stalks the room and calls you all somanauts, voyagers casting out into inner deep space. But there's nothing astral about it, so far as you can see. You think of it more like spelunking, like cool, dark caves. Once you get past the smell, it's practically intoxicating, like peering inside your own skin. Jeremiah crosses the country hosting workshops like this one. You picture him like a one-man traveling circus, cadavers in tow. He preaches the subtle beauty of organs, shimmies his arms to illustrate the movements of the heart. In every cut, he says, you're opening a door, a portal into the great beyond. You watch him move through the room, nodding emphatically and making overlong eye contact, and you hope he doesn't turn out to be some sort of cult leader. Cults have been on your mind lately because of the guru. 2 months ago, Vic, your boss, gave you a box of cassette tapes to transcribe, old recordings of the guru from the 70s. The guru's young disciples called themselves the Beloved, and Vic had once been one of them, traveling in a bright and wild caravan across India. The tapes are one of his pet projects, an archive of the guru's extemporaneous musings, a project that's now been foisted onto you. A part of you fears that really Vic gave you the tapes because he detected in you some sort of spiritual paucity and he wants to redeem you. Recently, he looked up from his computer screen to declare that all people struggle with one of 3 things: anger, ambition, or lust. I don't struggle with any of those, you said, in part because it was true and in part because you didn't want to hear where this was going. A week later, you found the tapes on your desk. Your job is to edit a monthly newsletter that calls itself a magazine and occasionally to write, though in truth you've been doing less and less of this lately. Your office is in the UN building, hidden in a decayed and yellowing back hallway. Every morning you pass through grand foyers blazing with light, long carpeted hallways lined with galactic assembly rooms. Then you turn into the shoddy ruins of the press wing, crowded desks heaped together, halls littered with the guts of discarded computers. You turn once more into the lightless back passageway where they stow the people who barely count as press, like you. When you told Vic you needed to cut out early a few days this week and the next, he said yes because he always says yes to you. This is part of the problem. What kind of class was all he asked? And for a split second you considered telling him the truth. Self-defense, you said. Now you and Frank take turns holding the skin taut and slicing axial lines as the manual instructs. Embalming fluid beads up, dribbles and leaks. In oily, wet darkness, Gracie's insides opening like burst fruit. The strangest thing isn't cutting someone open, you think, but the fact that mostly people stay intact, that they move through their days unpunctured, that they don't go spilling out all the time. When Jeremiah says that not everyone will get all the way to the heart, you look at Frank across the table. But we will, you say. And Frank nods as if he can see it in your face. This is what you came for. This is the whole thing. The black hole in your chest. The unseeable thing you have to see. Darling, says Frank, we're about to start on the axilla now. He's talking not to you, but to Gracie. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to talk to your corpse. But though you've now touched and prodded and manhandled a corpse, though you've now posed and sharpied and sliced a corpse, this is the one thing you will not do. Gracie's face, when you finally manage to look at it, is a kind of blankness you've never seen, like she's just had the fright of her life and exited swiftly from her skin. It's not such a simple thing, you realize, to stand above a dead body, knife in hand, and feel completely blameless in the whole affair. Jeremiah pauses at your table, registers the movement of your hands. You can press harder, he says, resting a blue-gloved hand on yours. You feel yourself go stiff, but the scalpel moves certain and sure, and the membrane separates, a clean, straight line. See, says Jeremiah, talk to her while you do it. I will, you lie, I will. You picture a satellite bouncing signals into empty space, your voice naked and undone. If anything, you'd like to apologize, though for what you're not exactly sure. Your brain whispers half maniacally, half sincere, I'm sorry for killing you.
That was great, thank you. So I think the first thing I wanted to ask you about is something that pops up in a lot of these stories, and it's this idea of running away. We have a lot of girls that are running to things, running from things, and I'm thinking specifically about Coming To, which is the story where these women are shot by the governor, and they live through it and testify against him, but then nothing happens, and they just have to go back to work. So there's this idea of women not being heard, and I thought that lined up in an interesting way against these women that are running away. And I wondered what you thought about that, like in the way the novel was formed.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that makes me think about, like, if you're running away, there must be something you're running towards, but, like, what is it? And I feel like in a lot of cases they don't know, and that does maybe have something to do with, like, the sort of, like, in-between interstitial space that I think I was thinking about when I was writing these. And, like, I think that is also connected to this idea of, like, can you actually tell stories about violence and trauma? And I feel like, most of the stories are sort of like erring towards, like, no, you can't, or like they can't actually be heard even if they are told. I don't know if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, and there are two stories in here. It's Dead Girls and Choreograph, and these are the only two stories that I really explicitly saw people sort of taking control of the body and doing something with the body. In Dead Girls, we see this woman learning to dissect the body. In Choreograph, we see this man that choreographs people, but then we also see the narrator's sister who choreographs the voices of people she hears and the voices in her head. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm thinking here, if you can talk a little about instances or those instances in the novel where people, these women, work to sort of regain control and to be heard, where like society is sort of failing them, they're failing, men are failing.
Yeah. I think, like thinking about choreograph, there's like, there's the actual choreographer, Nijinsky, and then like there's also his sister who he's sort of like posing and like using as like his test case study as like his own body and seeing like how her body moves. So I sort of, in that story I was sort of thinking about it in terms of like that, like in terms of the narrator's relationship with her sister, and how she's sort of trying on like these different poses, and sort of like, I think that's something I'm interested in a lot of these stories, like the sort of like blurring of identities and stories. I think, in Dead Girls, I think I wanted to end with that story, because the first story felt like a sort of refusal to narrate, for the narrator to narrate her own story. Like it ends with this scene of her thinking she's run away, and she's thinking that maybe she'll call home, and she knows all the words that she's going to say to make it okay, but instead she hangs up the phone and sort of refuses to say what's happened to her. And I think in Dead Girls too, there's sort of like an acknowledgement of the violence of narrativizing certain events, but also like a willingness to move towards it anyway.
No, there were a lot of really interesting instances in that story. So we don't just have whatever the initial trauma is, right? She's on the phone and something's happened, like she's been abused and she's not sure and she's waiting for tests back. But then there's also the thing where she sort of, her boss inappropriately touches her, inappropriately says things to her, and she just sort of blames herself. And then we see the new intern, right, that stands up, right? And so she gets to watch this woman's body in this instance do the thing that she felt she should have done.
Right.
And then later she's touching this literal corpse of a body.
Yeah, I think that's like so true, that sometimes it's really like you have to see it happen to someone else before you can acknowledge what happened. Like she sort of like blames herself for this like creepy, like minor Harvey Weinstein-esque boss, and she's sort of like, am I too accommodating? Am I too pretty? Too ugly? Like, what did I do wrong? And it's only when like the same thing happens to someone else that she like actually has some like visceral emotional response. So I don't know.
So much of this book, I think, sort of lines up with women that are experiencing trauma and then questioning their own experience, questioning whether or not their body is real. There's a lot of talk about realness and them wondering if they're real, wondering if the place they're in is real. Like there's this in-betweenness, right, of them not feeling stable. Are their experiences real? So I'm really interested in this idea of trauma and realness and how these things are sort of grappling back and forth throughout the book and a lot of the stories.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, I don't know, like a few people have like read this as like really like a story or like a book that is about death, which is like, you know, like it's called Dead Girls, so that's completely fair. But I didn't think of it that way when I was writing it. I thought of it more as like of thinking about deadness as a way of sort of being like in this in-between state in your own life, like what does it mean to be like dead in your own lifetime and like exist in this kind of like in-between state, like this aftermath. I forget what the question was.
I think I said something was interesting and then glanced at you and waited for you to say it. There are a lot of ghosts in here too, and I think one of the times I was really interested in sort of ghost as something that's not just a literal ghost was, I'm not sure which story it was in. It's the one where her cousin's father has died. Yeah, so her cousin's father has died, and she has trouble remembering what her father looked like, because now all she has is sort of the memory of him, and pieces of him are starting to fade. So what he looks like in the face, I think, is one of the first things to go. So there's this idea that her memory of him is sort of a ghost of him. So I think a lot of the novel is these things that aren't there anymore. We have a lot of moves from childhood to adulthood and sort of trying to stretch back, right? There's secrets between girls, or all these things that aren't quite happening, which I think plays into the in-betweenness.
Yeah, I like that idea that that like memory is a kind of like ghost. Yeah.
Again, wasn't a question, Emily. So in Nausicaa, you talk about, I think there's a place where you said places become stories, and gaps between these stories become more stories, until finally talking begins to resemble a map, everywhere leading everywhere at once. So we've talked a little about your book being about in-betweenness, and so I think your book is also sort of a map, because it's all those in-between parts. And I wondered, sort of broadly, what you thought your book was about, which I think is a big question, but a literal question this time.
Yeah, I think I do think of it like as a book about trauma, and like sort of like the weird formlessness that sort of like pushes you into, like where the world is like not quite certain anymore, and where, yeah, I don't know, but at the same time I feel like I wasn't I wasn't really aware of that when I was writing it. It was only like afterwards, or like as I was like finishing the last story, that I was like, oh, maybe this is what it's about.
Do you think it's about girlhood?
Yeah. Yeah, girls, and
as being the sort of in-between space, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I wondered, there's a section I wondered if I could get you to read. It's the section on 138 with Molly. And then I'll let you read it, and then I'll ask you my question.
The one that starts Molly and I.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Molly and I sat on the stoop one night talking. What do you want? Why do you want to be an astronaut? I asked. She thought for a minute and said in Hindi, "There was a woman in a spaceship." I nodded, not understanding. There was a woman in a spaceship, and it exploded above the Earth. She meant Kalpana Chawla on the space shuttle Columbia, I realized. Explosion, Molly said again, using the English word and pointing at the sky. We both looked up.
So I guess my question for you is, why? Why did that little girl want to be an explosion, and sort of how does this little girl who wants to be this explosion in the sky connect to the other girls in the book?
Yeah, I'm sort of like just realizing now how many like spaceships there are in this book. Like I didn't really realize that until right now. Yeah, there's like a lot of spaceships and aliens, and like I think like in this case, and like also like with like Edie, who like thinks she's an alien. I think like sort of like outer space and aliens are kind of like a good out from sort of the like false choices that like girlhood forces you to make, or like adolescence maybe. Yeah, it just seems like a much more appealing option.
No, I think a lot of this book is about that, right? The idea of being a girl being so difficult and being so hard, and the idea of being an alien or a ghost or projecting yourself elsewhere, disassociating from your body, being this really interesting thing, this way to escape. I think Edie is a story where it comes up a lot. I was thinking a lot about Edie. Edie's this little girl who tells everyone that she's an alien and convinces everyone to do these sets of things so they can be an alien like her. And then we sort of later see that Edie has a terrible home life and has probably like been abused in multiple ways, probably from a young age. And so we were seeing her trauma like really enacted. And then the other character in the story, the narrator, feels closer to her or wants to reconnect with Edie later when she then experiences that trauma. So is trauma something that is connecting girls?
Yeah. I think so, maybe. I think like in that story, the narrator is sort of like experiencing this like sense of formlessness when she's around Edie, and sort of like being in this world that is like part this world, part another world, and she's never quite sure where she is, and like the ground feels like sort of like formless beneath her feet when she's with Edie, but she's still like, she can still like go home to her sort of like stable house and like be on flat ground. But then later in the story, her mother dies, and she sort of like enters into her own state of formlessness, and like that's, yeah, and I think in that story also, like that's sort of when she becomes susceptible to sort of like some of the bad things that like Edie has already experienced. And I think part of what I was thinking about was like, when and why are we susceptible to stories that aren't ours, or like bigger cultural narratives? And I think like it partially is that formlessness of like not knowing quite where the ground is. Yeah.
Okay. I think I have one last question before we open it up, and that's there are two sorts of moves I see happening in the book. One of them is where you sort of weave in other things, like there's the Joyce's Nausicaa that gets woven in, but then there are also moves where you sort of move through time, right? So I wanted to hear, and this is just the thing I'd personally like to know, what your writing process is like. If you wrote these things and then wove them together, if you had to write them from the beginning to get to where you were, like skipping from thing to thing, because we like move between bits of research sometimes, and just what that process looked like.
Yeah, a lot of them, it was a lot of research, and I feel like that sort of like fragmented feel is sometimes like because of that. I think I do write them like sort of like as they read, like one thing after another. Although not always. Like sometimes, like I don't know. Sometimes I know the ending, but I don't know how I'm gonna get there. I feel like I sort of have to hear like a voice, and I hear like a first line or like a last line, and then I don't know, and then I'm just sort of like trying to like write towards that. I think and the process is, except for the last story, which I was like working on for like several years, like sort of like on and off, I did write them sort of like one at a time.
It's amazing, several years. I mean, it's a long story, but
it felt really long.
That's commitment.
Yeah, I didn't think it would ever like come together like until like the very last moment.
It's my favorite story in the book. So I'm glad you worked on it for 2 years. All right. Did you guys have questions?
Zach?
So I'm actually like interested in short story collections as like a form, because they're so different from novels, and like they don't like necessarily fall into like a natural order. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like how you went about ordering the book, like what you put in, what you left out, like what the process, not so much of writing it, but of like sort of assembling it into like a coherent thing was like for you.
Oh yeah. I think it was sort of like a happy accident that like the first story that I wrote is also the first story, and the last story I finished is also the last story. But I do think that there was like a kind of maybe like a progression in my work that happened, and so I was sort of like I don't know, trying to order them to reflect that. I think like the first story is sort of like I think there's a movement towards the end of like moving towards other people like in little ways. I think of like each story becoming like more relational, if that makes sense. I think like her like speaking to Gracie is sort of like that should be like the end. But yeah, I don't know. It was fun. It was like fun trying to like figure out what order they should be in. Yeah.
Thanks for a beautiful reading. I can't wait to read this book. I was actually wondering if you could, did you have any influence on the cover? Because I love the cover.
Oh, okay.
And I'm curious, like, if you had thoughts on it, like if you contributed to it and why, I guess. Like, I love that.
Okay, thank you. I contributed the idea. I sort of like I really wanted to design it myself, but they wouldn't let me. I don't know, the first cover mock-up that the designer sent me actually was like I had told friends, like, as long as it's not like a pastel tinted girl staring into the distance, and as long as it's not a corpse, it'll be fine. And it was a pastel tinted corpse staring into the distance. So I was just like very, like, I tried to like send like a nice email, but like strongly worded email that was like, I would really like to like not move away from imaging of corpses or deadness in any way, since that's already like very clear in the title. I wanted the heart because it sort of connects to the final story, and I did want it to sort of be read as a book about not so much about literal deadness. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, you guys. Oh, sorry.
I asked you about your epigraph.
Oh, yeah.
Will you just tell us a little bit about why you chose it? You can read it.
Okay, yeah.
Like taking Brandi's place.
I'll read it. This is from the poet James Fenton. It is not what they built, it is what they knocked down. It is not the houses, it is the spaces in between the houses. It is not the streets that exist, it is the streets that no longer exist. It is not your memories which haunt you, it is not what you have written down. It is what you have forgotten, what you must forget, what you must go on forgetting all your life. And with any luck, oblivion should discover a ritual. That's a hard question.
Spoke to a lot of the sort of ideas that you bring up already.
I think I really liked the idea of like in betweenness and sort of that what a sort of like tension between what is absent and what is present, how that connects to memory.
Oh, I would so like for you to talk about I know you have like a sort of novel ruminating. Mm-hmm. I'd like to hear about that.
Okay. I feel like I'm really bad at talking about what I'm working on not because I'm like superstitious about it, but because like I don't really know. It's just sort of like little threads are sort of like, I feel like I'm throwing out little threads, and like at a certain point they start to like connect, hopefully, but maybe not. And then eventually I sort of figure out what it is I'm writing about. So right now the little threads have to do with the newspaper where I worked in Cambodia, which I thought I would not write about for a really long time because it just seemed too big and too hard, but it was like shut down by the government recently. Like the government is like cracking down on media and like opposition, and so suddenly like the fact that it no longer exists made it somehow easier to start writing about. And that's sort of like one of the threads.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Brandi.
Anything else?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.